Well, wonderful. All right, so we're going to get started. I know that the hour is late, and I thought, frankly, that when I saw that Joe Biden was speaking at 8, that nobody was going to come, but then it started at 7:30, so that worked out. So I'm glad you are all here. I wanted to explore for 2 sessions themes around Hanukkah. Obviously, there are many different themes around Hanukkah, but the 2 that were most interesting to me were miracles and darkness. And the reason that I wanted to explore darkness is that I was moved by, you know what, hold on, I'm gonna just wait one more second as a few more people come in. So the Hadar Institute in New York, Machon Hadar, they put out a guide for studying text for Hanukkah. And the frame that they put out this year was exploring the opposite of light. And in that we're living amidst a dark time, both in the literal sense, that we're in the darkest time of the year, but also amidst a pandemic and so many other things. And wondering what our tradition has to teach us about seeing light in dark. And so we're going to look not at social justice texts and not at texts about the way we should do good in the world, but actually texts about what did it mean to be dark? What did it mean for Adam and Eve, the first human beings, to experience darkness for the first time? How did they understand how to be in the world? And so we're going to look at a few different texts, and we'll of course look at the Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai controversy around how we should light the menorah. And so we'll explore that together. And I wanted to bring it into this space. We often talk about it with in a multi-generational space, but I thought in this sort of turning on our intellectual brains this evening for 45 minutes, we can play with these texts together. And then next week I want to look at miracles. So moving from darkness to miracles, and that's what I wanted to do for this time. And so just off the cuff, if I say darkness, you respond with
light.
Okay. Or what? Okay. What else? Let's just throw out emotions, feelings, adjectives. What do you got?
Sadness.
Sad. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Fear.
Okay.
Emptiness.
Cold.
Emptiness. And Howard, what did you say?
Cold.
Cold. Okay.
Night.
Loss.
Loss and night.
Loss.
Mm-hmm.
Bleak.
Okay. All right. These are all really important things to hold as we explore these texts together. So here we go. Let us we are going to be studying Torah. So let's say, I didn't put it on here, but let's say the blessing for studying Torah together, which ends la'asok b'divrei Torah and begins just like all of our other blessings. If you know, great. If not, and I mean, at the end, we'll do just fine. But it's thanking God for allowing us to busy ourselves in the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kichanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. All right, let's jump right in to the Talmud.
Can you make the print larger?
I sure can, Howard. I sure can. Let's try this. How's that? Thumbs up? All right, cool. Howard, would you be up for reading a little bit tonight? So I'm going to put it up here, and if you can just read, we'll read the whole thing, then we'll unpack it together.
Our rabbis taught the mitzvah of Hanukkah is to have one lamp per household, but those who are zealous and want to do extra, a lamp per person. And the most zealous, Beit Shammai says, on the first day, light 8, from then on, reduce by one each day. But Beit Hillel say, on the first day, light one, from then on increase. Ula said, two rabbis in the West, Eretz Israel, disagree about this. Rabbi Yosei bar Avin and Rabbi Yosei bar Zavida. One said, the reasoning of Beit Shammai is to correspond to the days that are yet to come, while the reasoning of Beit Hillel is to correspond to the days that have passed. The other, one said, the reasoning of Beit Shammai is to correspond to the bulls of Sukkot, the number of bulls sacrificed on each of the 8 days of Sukkot, plus Shemini Atzeret, reduces each day, while the reasoning of Beit Hillel is because of the principle, they go up in holiness, but do not go down. That is, once someone is promoted to a higher level, they shouldn't be demoted. Similarly, the holiness of Hanukkah should only increase and not decrease.
All right, thank you, Howard. So there's a lot of different teachings in this text. So let's unpack it and then we'll explore. Again, I want to explore what our tradition is teaching us about darkness here, okay? So what is this saying? At least 3 different things. What is one? I'm going to leave it up there for a minute. And then what is one? The first thing it's saying. You can just unmute yourself since I can't see everyone.
How many lamps you should have per household?
Okay, and what does it say?
You should have at least one, but you can have one per person if you want.
If you really want, if you want to be super zealous, you could have one for each person. Zealous in the positive sense, let's say that. Okay, what else is this saying? Thank you. Susan?
It says to light the menorah or the Hanukkah, 8 days go down, reducing by 1. Is there anybody, I don't mean a person, buddy, I mean, are there any Jewish groups or anything that does it that way?
That's a great question. So let's, the quick answer is there are probably people who do both. But the reasoning that they give for Beit Shammai's proposal of having all the lights at once and then reducing it down to none is what? What does it mean to correspond to the days that are yet to come? Or that about the sacrifices of Sukkot? Deborah?
I'm not sure, but I think since the oil, was burning, and then as the days progress, the oil gets used up, so the light goes down. So that was sort of the reasoning for Shammai, that you decrease the number of lights each night the way, as it's burning. And then interesting thing with Sukkot, because in Maccabees, the reason for Hanukkah is not the miracle of the oil. That didn't come until Talmud times. It was because they hadn't been able to celebrate Sukkot during the war. So they celebrated Sukkot because that was the most important holiday. And so this would correspond to the number of bulls that were sacrificed each evening or each day.
Exactly. Great. Yes to all of that. Thank you. Other thoughts of what this is saying here? Carol?
So just to add on to that, if we think about this year as an example, if we follow Beit Shammai's theory or philosophy, then we start when there is still light. We're lighting 8 candles. And by the time we get down to 1 candle, we've hit the darkest day of the year. And then we begin in the next cycle to increase light again. Now, originally, I actually believe that it was supposed to be the other way, that we're starting with 1 because that is the darkest day of the year, and then increasing it. But the calendar, the Jewish calendar and the English calendar, the American calendar and the English calendar don't always jive like that. But the other thing I was thinking about is we're told in Talmud to put the Hanukkah in the window to show people the light and be proud that we're Jewish. But Talmud also says that in times where it was dangerous or risky, we should not put the Hanukkah in the window. And it linked me back, the idea of it linked me back to this year where we have COVID and we're dealing with COVID-19 and we're all huddled up in our own houses and not going out to parties and celebrating and being joyous outside. So in a way that sort of gives us permission to, because it's risky to go out, it gives us permission to light the menorah in our own homes. And maybe more like Hillel, we start with 1 and build up to 8 because there's hope on the horizon. So holiness increases, but also hope increases.
I like that a lot. Yeah, certainly that is deeply, this notion of hope is deeply embedded in the ritual of Hanukkah. So Nancy, why don't you jump in, and then I'm gonna ask a different question.
I was thinking, I had never thought of it this way before, but I was thinking that Shammai's view is really more, even though he says look to the future, it's really more pessimistic, because we know that every night coming, we're going to have less and less light. But Hillel's is more optimistic because we know that every night coming, we're going to have more and more light.
That, yeah, I mean, you could flip that the other way, I suppose, too, about experiencing the moment. I could imagine a counter argument to that. But yeah, I mean, what you're saying is exactly true. So let's think about it this way. How would our days of Hanukkah feel different if we were adding or decreasing light? I mean, sort of just building on what Nancy just said. But for you personally, how would it feel?
I think it's sad. I mean, it's like building up a crescendo of light.
Okay.
I mean, it's just, I don't know. I think whenever you take things away, there's a diminishing, a reduction.
So absolutely. I mean, to the extent that we can take off a layer of like personal memory and feelings about it and kind of look at it objectively, I would put that out there too. But yeah, I think you're right, Harriet. Absolutely. Other thoughts? What would it feel like?
Well, it would feel like you're bringing in more darkness. If you're taking away light each night, you're making it darker and darker. And that really feels sad, especially at this time of the year. I agree with Harriet. There's something very uplifting about the lights building each night and seeing that in the Hanukkah. It would feel the opposite if we were taking one away.
Thank you, Susan. Bonnie? Wait, I really want to hear what you have to say, but I think you're muted. Still muted.
It doesn't want me to now.
There you go. Now we can hear you.
Thinking back to family, this is just a silly aside, but what I loved as the candles got added, there were more opportunities for more kids to have more turns, and it made it more fun.
Absolutely. The more there's more engagement with it too, right? It takes more time. There's more intentionality that you put into it, not only for the amount of them, but you have to, especially if there's, you have to be careful. There's a certain amount of sensitivity you have to bring to it, just by the nature of you have at the end 9 candles burning on your table or in your windowsill, whatever it is.
It was even the intentionality of picking the colors, and you got to choose more colors to put in the menorah.
Yeah, totally. I totally get that. Al, and then Susan, and just want to make sure I get people on the second page. Okay, great. And then we're gonna look at a totally different text.
Really fast. Is this in fact a case of the Talmud setting up a straw man argument using Shammai as it so often does, and we're not really meant to take that seriously?
My personal read on that is no, but I suppose it's entirely possible. Only because I think that he has a reasonable argument. Sometimes Shammai has kind of a more obscure argument, but I think it's a fair assessment. You had all this cattle that was brought in on Sukkot, and every day you had the most at the beginning, and every day, there were a few less, as it were. But yeah, for sure. Susan.
Well, going back, sorry, Al, but going back to what Bonnie said about the excitement of lighting a new candle, and to me, lighting it from left to right is just welcoming a neighbor and welcoming a new candle to the party. And so that always makes me feel happy to, say hi to the new candle. And yes, whatever color you could pick.
Great. So, okay. Check this out. Check this text out. Okay. This is from Midrash Tanhuma. Midrash Tanhuma is a pretty old midrashic text. The specific date is escaping me right now, but Tanhuma comes from tachanun, or compassion or comfort. So every single midrash in Midrash Tanhuma, and this comes from the Warsaw edition, from Parshat Tetzaveh, is going to end with some sort of calming, comforting message. Would somebody read this? Danny, would you, because you're right in front of me on the screen, would you be able to read that?
Sure, I'm happy to.
Thank you. Well, there we go.
Pure olive oil beaten for the light. You find that someone standing in the dark can see things that are in the light, but someone standing in the light can't see things that are in the dark. The holy blessed one, however, can see in the dark or in the light. As it is said, God knows what it is in the darkness.
Okay, so thank you. When I came across this text, I was like, whoa, that's a really different perspective. So let's talk about this. What is this text saying for humans and for God? Again, I'll leave it up there for a minute. What might this text be saying?
That in the midst of all of our joyousness for the holiday, we still need to be able to see things that need fixing, see things that are dark. And that perhaps by going back to the first one, by starting with one candle, it's not so bright that you can't see what needs to be lightened up, that you increase it so that you can see what needs to be fixed all around us in the midst of our joy.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Before I jump in, our other thoughts?
Could it have something to do with our own spiritual condition?
Karen, nice to see you.
It's been great to be a part of the community again. That's been one of the gifts of COVID. But one of the things that struck me is, first I was thinking about how our eyes adjust once we've stood in the darkness for a while. But then something sang out to me more about someone who's in the darkness, or somebody who's in that dark place within themselves, often can look out and see that everyone has everything that they want and they just don't, or that, you know, they feel like they can't get out of the darkness, even though they can see that others are in the light. And that it's easier when we stand in the light. A lot of times we may not have understanding for that darkness. And so we can't really see what it's about. And yet the light welcomes everybody, but God truly, you know, sees all of it. Understands both people that are stuck in the darkness or in the light, or maybe the people that are maybe a little bit in between.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. This text really, truly, to me, it gives a sense of sacred, right, to that unlit place. Let's just call it that way. Here it seems to be saying, let's not write off the darkness as a place to see things that we may not have been able to see otherwise. And that lest we think that we're alone in the dark, we're not, because surely God can see, and God is with us in this moment. Other thoughts on this? I'm going to pull this down. But if you think about it, right, this sort of gives credit to Shammai, right? That in that decreasingness, or even forget about the Hillel Shammai argument, that recognizing that in this moment of darkness, we shouldn't just automatically jump to the light because we might be missing something. Yeah, so let's see. I see Danny. Carry it, and then Danny, and then we'll go around.
I was thinking that we always see the darkness as such a bleak place, but that sort of gave me a little bit more hope that even in the darkness, you could see your way out to a lighter place. And when you're in that lighter place, as Karen said, sometimes it's hard to be empathetic about the darkness.
Yeah. Thank you. Danny.
Harriet, I like that, what you said about it's hard to be empathetic for for what's in the darkness. And what I'm thinking about is there's something very relational here, which is that if you're in the dark, if someone brings the light near you, you can find your way out. But when you're in the light, all you know is that you need to continue to bring your light to wherever there is darkness. Your responsibility is bigger, and you need to be bringing that light to help find those people. And I sort of like that idea that it's not narrowed in on an individual, but rather you're searching out the darkness with your light to help guide people wherever they are, leaving God aside. I mean, there's a spiritual component there as well, but I like this idea of, you know, you're continuing to bring your light wherever you can. And that's an argument for Hillel, not for Shammai. So you're in the light constantly.
Yeah, I absolutely. I think that's right. And then I just think the only thing that this text is telling us to be cautious of is when you are amidst that light. And this is exactly, I think, what Karen was saying in part. The text says it's a little hard sometimes to see the dark. Like when there's so much, you might oversee, or you might overstep, or you might not notice it in the way that in a different sense, with a different set of glasses on, you might notice it. So I think both are absolutely right. I see Carol and Howard, and then we'll keep going.
This text started with pure olive oil to see the light. And then it went on to talk about light and darkness. And I've been thinking about that olive oil, those first 5 or 6 words. And what hit me is that fresh olives right from the tree are bitter, bitter, bitter. You can't eat them. The bitterness just stays in your mouth for weeks.
Yeah, have you ever tried?
And yeah, well, my father-in-law had olive trees, and he loved to tell people, have you ever had a fresh olive? It's delicious. You know, it's awful. But so no is the answer. But out of the bitterness, out of the fresh olive comes the oil. Out of the bitterness comes the way to the light, the way to make the light. And so I linked it that way. It makes me feel better because now I figured out, I think I figured out why at least I could link that verse to it. But
Nice.
the thing I was thinking about is we are always in the dark. It doesn't matter how much light there is around us. There's always more we can learn. There's always more we can figure out, even on our computers. I think I'm in the light now, but I have this button here that makes it brighter. So I think we're kind of always in the dark searching for more light. And whether you define light as light or whether you define it as warmth or knowledge or any of the other sorts of things that light brings us, you know, we need both, but we're constantly searching. We're constantly
Nice.
growing.
I mean, Howard, go ahead and then I'll ask a question.
Well, to me, there's a dimension missing in this example, because who hasn't been in the light and at another time in the darkness, and vice versa? So what's missing to me is a perspective here.
So what do you, yeah, Ronnie. Wait, Ronnie, are you?
Okay.
All right,
So-
Shelley, we'll come to you next.
So what I actually felt, adding to Danny's perspective on it being relational, is that in the dark, we often stumble. And the idea that God sees in the dark gives me a sense of a potential guide to help me through the darkness. And that it is in God seeing in the darkness, that there is someone who has a chance to catch me, to watch me as I am groping in the dark.
Great, thank you, thank you. Shelley.
I think that on Hanukkah and on almost all other times, we have a moral obligation.
Shelley, you can't hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me? I'm not muted.
Oh, no, come closer to your mic.
You want me to eat my computer here? All right. I was going to say, can you hear me now?
Enough, yeah.
You can hear me enough now, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have an obligation not only to bring the light, but to increase the light. Increase the light is something that we can do for those who need our help. And, you know, I keep going over, as this conversation was going on, I keep hearing over and over again in my mind some lines from Southern gospel music. My little light, I got to make it shine. I'm going to make it shine, you know, and brighter and brighter. And so, I mean, it's a moral idea that seems to be widespread.
Great, thank you for saying that, Shelley. Shelley, thank you. Nancy.
So, you know, we say many times that the more light, the better. But what occurred to me is it only takes the one light to banish the darkness. That's it. That's the beginning. That's where all the potential is. So we have to remember when we're looking for more light and we're hungry for more light, or we're doing it in a positive way. Like Shelley said, we're trying to disperse that light. It's still only that very first light that it takes to dispel the darkness. Once that's lit, the darkness is no longer dark.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a very famous Hanukkah song, Banu Choshech Legaresh. I mean, that we should banish the darkness, literally. Have there been times when you saw things better in the dark? Besides like a solar eclipse?
I think sometimes you're more honest with yourself in the darkness. You know, when when you're all by yourself, thinking, you really can confront the true reality without all the noise around.
I think sometimes when we close our eyes, and that's how we might meditate or get closer to God or get to a spiritual place, or we're actually bringing in our own darkness, a little bit of relief from the light, a little bit of quiet. So all the things we said in the beginning about dark were negative, but maybe there's some positive aspects of dark.
And class is over. No, I'm just.
Nancy, you nailed it again.
Judith.
Oh,
Ronnie and then Judith. Okay.
We also have the expression blinded by the light, that if anybody has driven west at sunset, we know what it means to be blinded by the light. And that we have to be careful that we really just miss all the subtleties with the light that's too strong.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Judith. And then I
Yes.
see Ed and Karen.
When you're in the dark, there can be an absence of distraction, but also as you're adding in light, a gradual addition is not always such a bad thing, because as you know, if you're in a dark room and somebody flips on the light, it's trouble. And so sometimes it takes a little bit of time to absorb the light that's coming your way.
Yeah. Thank you. Ed.
It's find it very reassuring that God is in the darkness, guiding me or understanding or.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, when we cover our eyes, if that's your practice around the Shema, I find that there's a sense of kind of blocking out, that there's a little bit of that there too. Yeah, I love that text. Karen.
So yeah, to be on the other side of it, there's also, I think Ronnie said blinded by the lightness, but also there's something called sundowners. So people who have a propensity, of getting more depressed. It's in the literature about children get much more introspective. I used to always say to my kids when they were young, because they would want to have these very heavy discussions at night. And I would say, why don't we wait until the sun comes up and, and talk about it. But so and the only other thing I was going to say that didn't come up is just the natural beauty of the darkness and talking about the sky, the stars, and the moon, that I do find on a dark night when there's nothing in the sky. I have a much harder time finding my way to, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And it's just so much more beautiful. And I feel lighter just by having the stars and the moon out.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right, two other things. And then I think everything that everyone has said thus far has been a beautiful segue into our next text. So Danny and Bonnie.
I just wanted to come back to what Nancy said about the light, like just a little bit of light kind of illuminates the darkness, which I think is a lovely idea. And yet it's juxtaposed with the idea of God as light, because I think the implication from the text is that God has this is like light, unlike anything else. And yet God's light, I think our own experience, or at least my experience, is it's actually hard to find that light, right? In the world that we live in, a very secular world, seeking out that light is actually the opposite of what we typically think of as like we have to actually work to find it, as opposed to it just appearing and illuminating the world. And that to me is sort of interesting, I think.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, that might be easier without, in the absence of, I guess. Great, thank you. Bonnie.
Well, I was going to say something similar to what Karen said. When you gave us darkness to begin with, immediately, I thought of stars and moon. I thought of the natural wonders that God sends, encouraging us to look up and to look for the heaven in his presence. And even here we are ready for a snowstorm. My favorite image is the snow falling in the pitch black.
It's so bright.
It's so bright, or the moon is so bright. And it just is reassuring always to me on a really dark inside day or a day of sadness or grief that you can always find the ray to sort of pull yourself back up.
That is beautiful. It is actually when there's a big snowstorm and it's so bright out in the evening. It is really, truly beautiful. All right, let's imagine for a second that we pray in the evening prayers. We thank God for moving day into night and night into morning, right? That's something we do every night. But let's imagine for a second that we were the first human being created and we were enjoying the fruits of a day, and all of a sudden the sun goes away and it gets real dark outside. So let's imagine that scenario for a second. And the Midrash also imagines this idea. And so this is what it says. And there's two Midrashim about this that I want to offer. They both, one comes from the Talmud and one comes from a collection of Midrash. Our rabbis taught, when Adam saw that the days were getting shorter, he said, "Oi, perhaps because I sinned, the world is dark because of me, that it will return to chaos and disorder. And this is the death that was given to me from heaven." So he got up and sat for 8 days in fasting and prayer. When he saw midwinter and that the days were started getting longer, he said, "This is the way of the world." He said, "V'holech amar manhigo shel olam, minhago shel olam." He went and did 8 days, 8 festival days, and the following year, he made both of these 2 sets of 8 days into festivals. So what is this? What is the Talmud telling us here? What did Adam do? What did Adam celebrate?
He celebrated
Ronnie.
lengthening of the days. He celebrated a sense of renewal, that it was not going to keep getting darker and darker, but there was a pattern to be followed that would bring a sense of a new beginning, a new cycle.
I mean, originally he thought to himself, "Oh my goodness, I had this sin. I caused the destruction of the world. It's going to get dark," right? And then all of a sudden it changes. And he realizes that, it got dark and it got dark. And he said, this is the end of me. And so he got up in 8 days of fasting and prayer, right? That's kind of an interesting parallel here between Hanukkah, which is an 8-day festival, and these 8 days that Adam was fearful, truly fearful. That was a practice in the Mishnah, right? That there's a whole practice of fasting when there's no rain or when something bad is happening. You can have communal fasts for all these different reasons. And here he does it too. So let's look at the one other one. And then he also creates a midwinter festival. So other reasons for Hanukkah here. Here's one more. I don't want you to see Mary Oliver yet. Don't look at Mary Oliver yet. Okay. Okay. So this is what it says. When the sun sank at the termination of the Shabbat, at the end of Shabbat, darkness began to set in. Okay, so this is the end of the first week, right? So it seems that darkness didn't begin to set in truly until the end of the first Shabbat. The first man was terrified. As it is said, surely indeed darkness shall bruise me, but the night was light about me. Shall he of whom it is written, he shall bruise your head and you will bruise him with your heel, or the snake. The snake now come to attack me. So what did the Holy Blessed One do for him? God arranged for him 2 flints, which he struck against each other, and light came forth, and he uttered a blessing over it. Hence it is written, but the night was light about me, ba'adeni, which means about me. But if, the text says, but if we repoint about me, you could change it to instead of about me, but the light was about me, the light was my Eden, the Edeni, the Edni. And so then what did he bless over? He blessed over thanking God for the illuminations of fire. Okay, so these are 2 different texts about Adam and darkness. So what is the first one saying and what is the second one saying? Any ideas?
I'm stumbling how Adam had knowledge to know that the world was chaos before him.
Say that one more. What was the first part of your statement?
I'm stumbling over the fact that Adam had the wisdom to know that the world was chaos before him.
Let's just make that assumption that he knew that. Yeah. These are our narratives of our sages, but yeah. Karen.
So I don't know if I want to tackle the second one, but the first one, to me, it strikes me that when things start to go dark, the first thing he does is he thinks it's about him. But when we're in darkness, I started to reflect, it does lend you more towards introversion. I mean, it often, we talked earlier, I think Nancy was the first one that mentioned it about, when we're in darkness, a lot of times, or the light is taken away, we can meditate, we can pray, we can come within. But it's interesting how he takes it and immediately goes into fear, which is something that was mentioned when you first checked in with us. All right. But then when he sees that it changes, all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is the way the world is. It's not about me. As he kind of comes into the light, it's like, oh, so I'm not the center of the universe. So that was just one of my thoughts.
And he adds, personal prayer and personal fasting, which clearly didn't do anything in that regard, because those were sort of self-serving actions in some sense, that he realizes that no, it's not what I do, but that this is the way of the world, and I need to figure out how to find the blessing in it and how to find the prayer in it. So therefore, I'm going to give a festival for when the light gets more, instead of when it decreases. The second one, though, and then we can put them in conversation with each other, I read as, when it is dark and when you think that everyone's out towards you, God's going to give you 2 sticks or 2 flints, and you need to do something about it. That you're the one, Adam. Don't be all fearful in the dark. Don't think that everything is going to be, don't go Job on me and think that everything is going to be all terrible, right? I'm going to give you the tools to figure out how to see your way out of it. And if we bring in Daniel, we'll know that you're actually not alone, but God is with you in that moment too. And then when you get the fire, make sure that you bless it, because it's a good thing that's going to lead you forward. So let's put them in conversation with each other. How do these 2 midrashim add to our conversation about light and dark in the context of Hanukkah?
I think they both talk about bringing light into the world, but in small amounts, not overwhelming. And that, as we talked about before, if there's too much light, sometimes you can't see the darkness that needs to be fixed, or the darkness in yourself that needs to be fixed, or the darkness in the world. And so that time for, you can turn that fear into meditation, but by making the flints bring in some light, we can help fix the world. And it's up to us in partnership with God to do that.
And then I think if you build it on the Hillel, right, all the more so, right? Gareth.
So I think these passages say several things to me. First, that God lives or exists in both the light and the darkness, that the light and the darkness are a natural progression, that they occur, and that by giving Adam the splints or the flint, you have control over what you make of each of those states. So I think all of those things tie together in a nice thread, at least.
That's nice. And then I guess also that you can actually control the volume of what the intensity of that light is, I suppose, as well. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Carol, go ahead.
So when we were thinking about the Garden of Eden, it hit me. I'm going to transfer the garden midrash or the Garden of Eden to a green valley rather than the garden, and that took me to the 23rd Psalm. So if you think about the words of the 23rd Psalm, I will walk in the valley of the shadow of death. That's the darkness, but I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. That's the light. And whether that's the light because God gave us 2 flints, or just God's with us that gives us the chutzpah or the courage to move on and do something, that takes us into the light. And that took me to the end of the psalm, which is, I shall, live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. And then that took me to the Passover Haggadah, which is all the days. That includes the days and the nights. So it's the light and the darkness, and it's not one following the other, it's consecutive. There's always darkness after light, and there's always light after darkness. So
thank you. You should write these down. Seriously, you should. It would be quite wonderful to have a collection of them. Absolutely. Thank you, Carol. Judy.
The other thing is that it's always light somewhere else when it's dark here.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. The world is moving around now. They didn't know that. Okay.
Actually, go ahead. Sorry.
What? Do you think they know it?
No, I was going to say there's a few different rabbinic texts which clearly lend itself to an understanding that the world is flat, and that they could see the light from end to end, or God could see the light from end to end, or Adam. And just it's a very pre-modern, not even pre-modern, even earlier understanding of the world. And so it's kind of interesting how even when we have those texts which came much earlier, that it reflects that as well. So thank you for saying that. This has been a beautiful conversation. I want to, does anybody else want to add anything before? Oh, Harriet, please.
Yeah. I just found it interesting that the flints were given and made fire, and fire can create light, but fire can also consume. And so that can have a negative connotation. For instance, the burning bush kept burning without being consumed. And some people are consuming with their fire and some aren't.
Oh, that's really nice.
Which goes back to the darkness, and when you're in the dark, being able to see the light. And sometimes people who have a lot of light don't necessarily see the dark.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. So, I mean, I bring you these texts in part simply just to bring us a little bit more intentionality, meaning to the Hanukkah candles when we light them. And when we light them, we're actually doing something, right? We are the ones who are moving God's light into the world. If we think of ourselves like Adam, we are the ones who need to increase the light, or to remember that in our abundance of light, well, especially in these later days of Hanukkah, in our abundance of light, that we have to seek out, that we might be missing some of those dark spots around us. And we have to make sure to see them. Or simply to allow ourselves, when the candles go down, to be good and okay with where we are. And so I want to thank one of my classmates, Rabbi Avi Strasberg, who prepared a series of texts, some of which helped me tonight, but she ended a teaching with this text, and I want to share it with you because it's quite extraordinary, in my opinion. Mary Oliver writes, in the Uses of Sorrow, in my sleep I dreamed this poem. Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift. So her poetry and writing is surely a gift, but I just wanted to kind of put that out there. That sometimes we talk and talk and talk and talk about the need to bring more light into the world. And I just want to bring these texts as somewhat of a caution to what we might be overlooking or what we might be missing if we run away from the dark all the time into the light. And so it's not about not moving in that direction. It's just about being more intentional in that process. And so just another lens for Hanukkah tonight on this 5th night, so that we can, at least for 3 more nights, be a little bit more intentional about it. My hope is next week to look at miracles, and that truly Hanukkah has in it an abundance of miracles. And certainly there were lots of Hasidic texts that were written about miracles, obviously pre-formation of the State of Israel. So I think they're important to look at. And we're going to talk about what miracles are in our lives, and what miracles are today, and what miracles are no more, and what is our responsibility to sustain miracles, in the same way that it's our responsibility to either sustain light and be aware of the dark. So I wish you all a Chag Sameach. I hope it is a meaningful holiday, lest we think that Hanukkah is purely about dreidels and latkes. It has, obviously, in so many senses of the word, a lot more that we can grow, and a lot more we can find within these days. So Chag Sameach. I wish you all a happy Hanukkah. And I hope that we'll continue to see you over the next few days. There's still a lot going on every night. I know Rabbi Sissenwein is teaching on Wednesday. We have a concert on Thursday. And tomorrow night, our new staff social worker, Daphna, will be speaking. And so I hope that you will all meet her, and have a good night.
Thank you, Philip. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Philip, may I ask you a question, Shammai? Whenever Shammai is mentioned, the only thing I ever think of is the lighting of the candles.